Hello, everyone. This is Adam Noyce from AN Productions, and joining me is the one and only Lucas Shaloth. He has been on here many times before, and we are here to talk about something very special. Lucas, what are we here to talk about?
Well, howdy guys. You've seen me many times before. I've talked about many cryptids and such, but today we're going to be talking about something a little special and a little to both of us, really. Today is going to be a discussion on. It's been out for a while now. Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time.
What a title!
What a title indeed! And I wanted to make sure I got it right.
Well, all of these movies have ridiculous titles, in
Yeah.
my humble opinion.
Well, I really like the first few where it's like the first one's like you cannot proceed. Is that it?
I
Or-
don't know the titles at all.
I like the not like the like you cannot and like the
You can
parentheses stuff.
not.
I really like shit like that. So like
I think it's just I think it's a meme.
yeah.
Yeah. But so before we really get into it, I just want to just say a couple of updates. Just a couple of updates. You're not going to be seeing much for activity from me. This is sort of an exception, but uploads are going to be slower because lately this has felt like a job, and I've said many times that the moment that this starts feeling like a job, I'm going to stop doing videos, and that's exactly what has happened. And so you're going to see fewer videos uploaded. It's not going to be once a week anymore. I'm going to be uploading whenever the fuck I feel like it, which is why this I plan on releasing as one long video talking about everyone's favorite topic, Evangelion. Because Evangelion is one of my favorite shows of all time. Easily on my, probably, if not my top 5, certainly my top 10.
Yeah, it is like I don't need to explain it. Like neither one of us really needs to explain why Neon Genesis Evangelion is a masterpiece. We're gonna do it anyway. But like it is such a cornerstone to anime. It's such a important pillar to anime in general. Like what it did is something I don't think can ever really be recaptured.
No, I don't think it can be either, and you all know me. I don't like anime. I'm not an anime simp, but I am an Evangelion simp. But more importantly, I'm a Hideaki Anno simp. You know, it had a big influence on a lot of things, which is kind of funny because that's almost not what Hideaki Anno wanted. But I love Evangelion. Anything Evangelion I tend to like. I have not played the video games, but I have read the manga to show you how serious I am about this, and the manga is definitely interesting.
I haven't touched the manga actually. I've always been interested in it, but I've never actually dived into it.
Do check it out. It's interesting. It is
sure.
different than the show. It's definitely a lot like the show, don't get me wrong, but there's key differences that makes it enjoyable to read. Do you well, before we get started, do you prefer Neon Genesis Evangelion and End of Evangelion, or do you prefer the Rebuilds movies? Which camp are you in?
I will give it to you straight. Watching these rebuilds and getting excited for Thrice Upon a Time, I had no thought in my mind that it would surpass Neon Genesis Evangelion or End of Evangelion. There was no idea in my mind that would happen. I still think it would be really. I was still hoping and would think it would be really good once it's a piece all put together. And I guess for like opening thoughts, I do think that it was a piece worth telling, and overall it's worth existing, because that was a big debate for a long time. People were like, especially when I think the third one dropped.
It was the third one in particular that I noticed the debate.
Yeah. That people were like, oh, what's the point of this? It just seems like, they're just trying to make it more action-based. But no, I think with everything said and done, it was a story worth telling, and I'm glad Anno got to tell that story. The thing is, though, I really, at times, I still prefer the story told in Neon Genesis Evangelion, and specifically End of Evangelion. Adam, you and I have gone to nauseum on our own time. Like, I think End of Evangelion is a masterpiece. You think End of Evangelion is a masterpiece.
Utter masterpiece.
Yeah, I think it's a great movie. A great film. I shouldn't say it's a film.
It is. It is a great
experience.
film. It is not just a great anime. It's not just a good cartoon or animated movie, I should say.
Yeah.
It is a good movie.
Yes.
For the record, I flip-flopped. It took me doing Congratulations, actually, for me to realize that I preferred the show and End of Evangelion over the rebuilds. And that's not me knocking the rebuilds. I just vastly prefer the show.
Oh, yeah, of course
to
not.
Because they are almost completely different beasts, and I like the rebuilds because they've made Evangelion kind of more consumer friendly, more like this is what a standard dude would watch.
Yeah.
While Neon Genesis Evangelion is almost niche. Like you almost have to understand going into it.
It's weird you say niche to describe Evangelion, because I've never really considered Evangelion niche, but I get what you're saying.
Well, I consider Neon Genesis niche. I
Yeah,
consider
yeah,
Evangelion not niche. I quite frankly,
yeah.
whenever people talk about Evangelion, I should say, Evangelion in general, they tend to be referring to the rebuild movies, and they tend to show clips from the rebuild movies, not the show.
Yeah,
I've also sort of started looking at it like this. If you wanted to talk about this in broad terms, the rebuild movies are basically like the kid in school who isn't really trying to draw attention to himself, but is rather, he's kind of a cool guy. He's
yeah.
the
I get
people
what
that people don't mind being around and talking to. Well, Neon Genesis Evangelion is the emo, depressed gothic person that sits in the back of the room brooding the entire time.
you're saying. Yeah. See, this is where I have to just chime in, and because my experience is a little different, because when I watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, I watched it with a group of people who wanted to watch Neon Genesis Evangelion. So that's where the whole niche thing gets a little
Ah.
like skewed for me, where it's like most of the people who I interacted with who knew of Evangelion did actually watch the original show. It's actually
Yeah.
even like my family too, like my brother and my dad, like they watched it as well. Like so, like it's ingrained in my family. Surprisingly enough, like I told my dad that Thrice Upon a Time was coming out, and he watched it the day of after I
Oh,
told him.
really?
Like,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
I did not watch it the day it came out. I only watched it recently and kind of a week ago or about, and just kind of like let it sink in.
Can I chime in on that really quick then?
Yeah.
Because for me, yeah, it was. There was zero chance of me not watching it the day it dropped.
course.
When I was at work literally all day, I was just like, nothing is stopping me. Nothing will stop this stream. I'm going to watch this movie. I don't give a shit.
I was going through something similar to Hideaki Anno, but I was like depressed as fuck, and I was like, I don't want to watch
I get
this.
it. Yeah.
because at least with Neon Genesis Evangelion and End of Evangelion, it's like I have to be in a specific mood and mindset to sit down and say I'm going to watch this show, because it starts off as a normal show, and then episode 15 hits and it takes a hard left turn.
Yeah.
And I love episode 15 onwards. I think is just utter art in every way, shape, and form. Which is funny because I will gladly say that I think Evangelion as a whole is the most artsy fartsy thing I will consider myself to get into, because it does get very artsy fartsy to the point that I understand why people say it's pretentious.
On the other side of the coin that I'm on, where it's like I feel like if you do commit to it and watch it and absorb it, like yeah, it's okay if you have to look up stuff afterwards. Like I've done that with many things. To
Oh yeah,
understand
like
stuff.
the lore in particular. I love how you kind of have to dig for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, and we'll get into this a little later, but at least the show, a lot of the lore is not said. It is seen in the background. It is quite literally flashed at you in many points.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's just like little hints in the background. Like several characters speak in code throughout the thing, and you have to dig. You have to really pay attention to the show, and I like that. That's the stuff that I like. I love the world building in Evangelion.
Like when I first watched it in End of Evangelion, my takeaway was, yeah, I get it. It's an anime classic. Like I understand it. It was only when I progressively got older, I was like, I need to go back. I need to just go back and really kind of deep dive a little more into it, because I don't think I fully appreciated it, which is true. I didn't fully appreciate it, and now I do.
It's a hard show. It really is a hard show. It's a great show.
Yeah.
And that movie is phenomenal, as I said. But as for the rebuild movies, they're fine.
Yeah, they're fine.
They're fine.
I never disliked any of them. Like there was never like
the animation's beautiful.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that more a little bit later. But I did not hate 3.0 when it came out. I think 3.0 just has a giant plot hole in it that still isn't explained. That sort of drives me crazy.
I think I might know what you're talking about, but we'll get to that.
It was okay. The music was phenomenal. Shiro Sagisu's best music score, I think, was in 3.0. Or 3.33, sorry. You cannot redo. So what did you think of Thrice Upon a Time with no spoilers?
Yeah, so Thrice Upon a Time, it was daunting to go into solely because, one, it's the official end of everything Evangelion. That's what it was pushed for, and it definitely is the official end, to me at least.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a little daunting going into it, especially knowing like the runtime was like almost 3 hours.
Which caught me off guard, by the way.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that until I started watching the film.
Oh,
I thought it was
I
going
knew
to be
that,
an hour and a half.
I knew that long in advance. It was like a 3-hour watch, so that helped me a little bit. But it's still, it's a 3-hour movie. That's a little daunting. It's a little like, okay,
especially for like an animated movie, that's daunting.
Yeah, but however, then you said for an animated movie, to me, that's exciting because you don't see that often with animation, considering how hard
really
of a medium
don't.
it is. So
Yeah.
like you don't see that often, and that's one of the things that of course got me excited. I was nervous there would be like a disconnect because this is basically the rebuild's end of Evangelion, and there's some comparisons later on which we will talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I was concerned. I was like, oh, I don't want to dislike this because I know this is a big deal. And I want to quote really quick a group I watch, Omega 64. I've talked to them about them because they're big Evangelion fans too, and they did like a movie review, and I believe it was Garrett on their team phrased it the best way I could possibly phrase it. I found Thrice Upon a Time at the end of once everything was said and done, relieving.
Well, that's not a bad term.
Yeah.
For it, because I felt relieved after watching this as well.
Yeah.
It was almost like a weight got lifted off of my shoulders that I didn't know was there.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, going into it, suddenly I saw that it was almost 3 hours long. I was like, my first reaction was how much of this is credits.
Yeah.
And then, which is about 15 minutes. And I was like, okay. But I was like, dude, if this movie's an hour and a half like the other 3 movies, I'm like, what? This is going to be a mess.
Yeah.
And I was happy it wasn't overly messy. There were parts of it that are messy, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
But in particular, the first half of this movie, I was utterly blown away by. I loved the first half of this movie.
It was unexpected for me too.
Well, to me, that's what makes. To me, Neon Genesis Evangelion, the battles aren't what make the show. It's these quiet moments that happen throughout the entire series that just blow you away. It's these character moments, and that's the entire first half of the movie.
Yeah.
And it was everything I would have wanted something Evangelion to be, and it explained a lot of the lore. It showed what life was like after the half-third impact. I left happy, and that never happens with Evangelion.
Yep.
And that was a good conclusion.
Yep.
It was a good conclusion for Well, to be clear, it was a good conclusion for Evangelion fans and Hideaki Anno.
Yep.
This is definitely the end of Anno's Evangelion.
Yes.
And you feel it.
Yes.
Where a lot of the faults come in, and this is my problems with the rebuilds, my biggest problem with the rebuild as a whole, is that unless you know these characters from the show, you tend to really not care about them in these movies very much other than that. You're kind of like, why should I feel attached to this characters? Which makes me love the first half of this movie, because the first half of this movie I genuinely think could have been a movie on its own, a standalone movie, and I would have loved it.
Yeah.
Regardless of if I knew Evangelion. I would have loved that first half of the movie as its own movie. And it works as its own movie. It works as somebody who's seen a lot of trauma, growing and saying, no, I need to finish this. I need to fight something, and then going off to fight it, regardless of if we see it or not. To me, that works as a shorter but a concise movie. But I'm thinking from this point forward, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't watched
I think
this
we're in
movie.
this book because it's also really hard to talk about this movie and the deep stuff to it without.
Especially since it's a conclusion as well.
It's hard. So Anno's intent with this movie, to me, and I feel like this isn't even like the biggest brain take ever about it. I think it's pretty straightforward what the intent is. It is, to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people, it is the polar opposite of what End of Evangelion was. It is, to me, the representation of how Anno is now as a person versus how he was when he made End of Evangelion.
I would agree with you to an extent. I really would. I mean, yeah. I think End of Evangelion is certainly a much angrier movie.
Yeah.
Than Thrice. Thrice tries to do a few things that it's trying to walk a tightrope, and I think it, for the most part, it did very well at it. And that was saying goodbye to the fans, but also Hideaki Anno saying goodbye to Evangelion. It was a bunch of people saying goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does.
That's it. You guys got it.
Well, the biggest difference, I think, is Thrice gives us a definitive ending, while End of Evangelion is very open for interpretation.
Yeah.
Very open for interpretation. And while I interpreted the ending of the End of Evangelion to be a very uplifting kind of ending. Like it's presented not as uplifting, but the more you think about it, it's uplifting. Again, you have to really think about it more. Thrice really explains everything.
Yeah, it definitely does.
About
It definitely
Ride Up.
explains way more than End of Evangelion did, because that final frame and scene of End of Evangelion is just so, it's still so haunting and
It's
powerful
haunting,
to this day.
yeah.
What is your interpretation of the End of Evangelion?
Well, Shinji rejects instrumentality,
Mhm.
aka everybody goes into the primordial soup and becomes one. So there's no individuality. There's nothing. We are all one being, a collective hive mind, essentially, which is what Seele wanted.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's rejected it, and so eventually people will be rebirthed into slowly will be rebirthed from the Sea of LCL, as
Yeah,
it's called, and everything will start going back to relative normal. Kind of hard to explain in 30 seconds, but essentially it is he's rejected, people are going to start coming back. And I love this explanation too. The Evangelion summed up, both of them really, is summed up is basically about a 14-year-old boy who is scared, lonely. He is afraid he's going to get hurt, both physically and emotionally. He is
Yeah.
depressed, but nevertheless says, "I'm going to take the risk and accept life anyways."
Yeah, yeah.
And that's not it exactly, the sentence. I remember reading the sentence, but I loved it. I loved that interpretation, and that sort of has influenced me in terms of how I look at the show and how I've even been writing shit recently. More than anything else was relatively that sentence that I just said.
Yeah.
Because that's really all Evangelion, if you look at it, is about. Everything else is kind of like the inside of the cake. Like, if you look at the frosting on top of the cake, that's what it is. It's about Shinji and him learning to love himself. Nothing really groundbreaking when you break it down like that. It's actually very simple. It's just told in a very bizarre way.
Very abstract, very
Very
visual heavy,
abstract
and
way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically kind of like the takeaway I have, for the most part, I have with End of Evangelion too. I just wanted to have that on the table, just so we kind of have a standing of that.
Well, what did you interpret it from it? Because if there's a lot of people I know that interpret it as an extremely downer ending, and I'm like, yeah, I get it.
I kind of interpreted very similar to you, that there is this kind of hope to it in a way, despite the fact that it ends with Shinji attempting to strangle Asuka. Like, despite that visual, I think there's a hopefulness to it overall. Specifically where it is, it's like, this is what he chose and this is the decision he made. But the thing is, it was a decision he made, as opposed to the rest of the series where he's almost decisions are being made for him. He took his own standing and made a decision on his own.
Well, it's also interesting to note that he stops strangling her the moment she gently caresses his face.
Yeah, because he realizes he goes back to his normal Shinji tendencies of being just a good person. Like he
Shinji is a good person.
Yeah,
He's a very flawed person, don't get me wrong. Well, that's the thing that I love about this show, is for the most part, all these characters are really flawed.
Yeah, yeah.
But they're not bad people. They are people thrown in these absolutely horrific, and I mean horrific, situations where they're told to keep these secrets that are just utterly horrible, that would eat anyone. Yeah. Any normal person would just eat them alive from the inside out, and in the worst ways possible. But they're trying to do the best they can. The only villains that I can really say in either the show or the rebuilds is Gendo, and I would say Seele as well. Seele, those people are pretty bad as well. But
I think with Gendo, you have a point with Gendo. I do think Thrice kind of helped Gendo's character a little bit.
It helped him a lot. That was the part that took me completely by surprise, by the way, was all the Gendo stuff.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that when we get to the characters and everything.
Yeah, note on the notes that I have Gendo bold, italicized, and underlined.
I'm glad, because he was definitely a character I wanted to talk about. Now that we've mentioned End of Evangelion. With Thrice, I feel it also is obviously very clearly a very like hopeful and happier ending than
this one outright says it.
Yeah, this one outright is like, there's no holding it back. But I think for this one, at the very least, it really hammers it home, the idea. And this was just from my viewing when I watched it, that there is a reason to keep pushing forward. There's a reason to keep going, and there's reason that you have to make these hard decisions in life. You have to take your own life and move forward with it, because you can proceed to this happy ending.
Well, there's many things that I love about this, and the one of the biggest one is Shinji realizing, I don't need Evangelion. I don't need the Evangelions. In fact, I'm going to reject the Evangelions.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
he's fighting Gendo, he's like,
There's
there's no way he can beat Gendo, so I'm not going to fight him.
there's a very specific aspect about Shinji's character I do want to hold off on talking about.
Yeah. But I wanted to mention that, and that's not End of Evangelion at all.
Oh.
And you can definitely see Anno's mentality, because it wasn't just Shinji saying goodbye to Evangelion, it was Anno, and you felt it the entire way through.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've watched that documentary that's on
I
Amazon.
I haven't yet.
I haven't either. I've only been reading these articles about him, but apparently Anno, he would show up to work really like late, and he would just sort of be quiet, and and evidently, what's interesting is he directed this, unlike all the other ones, he directed this like a live action movie, which drove a lot of the animators and the other directors crazy. And to me, it almost makes sense why he would want to do that, because that's adding a personal touch to it that animation otherwise doesn't have.
I see it.
It almost makes me go, Anno, go make live action movies. And I think that's almost what he wants to do, because I mean, he made Shin Godzilla, which is a masterpiece in every way, shape, and form.
And he's shown that he can do it. He's capable.
He
of
showed
doing
that he
live
can
action.
do it. Well, he's done live action movies before. He made this really low budget movie about these schoolgirls.
What is that?
That were
That
I forgot the name of it all. He's a good live action director.
Yeah.
God damn it! I think he's my favorite director alive. Who am I kidding? Yeah, it's called Love and Pop.
It was Love and Pop.
Yeah.
Okay. So also, I do want to mention he did do Cutie Honey.
He did do Cutie.
He did do Cutie Honey, so I wasn't far off. But yeah, that was one.
Hideaki Anno's kind of a perv, in some ways, and I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that too.
This is his show. Like, he's the one that created the original concept. This was his show.
Yeah.
This is his baby. Him letting go, and you feel that. You feel that, especially knowing, if you know who Hideaki Anno is, this film hits you harder.
Yeah.
In my opinion, anyways.
I agree with you. I agree with you totally on that.
And in many ways, this film hit me harder than End of Evangelion. I think End of Evangelion's a better movie, but just the emotional ties to Evangelion makes this film a little heavier.
I think that's kind of what helps, is that because you and I, we watched kind of around the same age range. We watched Evangelion. We were high schoolers, and now we're watching this out at like a year or two out of college. It's like, it's funny how it bookends like that sometimes.
Yeah, you're right. But man, was this movie in production hell.
Oh yeah,
I'm very glad that it got made. I can understand why it was in production hell, though, regardless of all the legal shit that Anna was going through with Gainax.
Yeah.
I understand, because this has to be, one, it has to be good.
Yeah.
Two, it has to wrap everything up. Three, you have to make sure that the fans are getting what they are, a relative.
Yeah. To an
ending.
extent.
And three, four, he has to say goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could tell he's sick of Evangelion. You could tell even back when they were first doing the rebuilds, he was kind of doing it because he needed money. You know, he kind of needed some financing, and that just hurt him as he went along. And plus, I guess Evangelion 3.33 you cannot redo. I guess that was production hell.
Yeah.
As well. So I guess that really just affected him. So he made Shin Godzilla. I hate him. I hate how good at everything he is. Were there twists and turns that you were not expecting?
Well, I think the biggest twist and turn that I wasn't expecting was the first half of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was,
that was the first one immediately that jumped out to me.
Yeah, because we knew the opening scene of the movie, like the Paris fight scene,
which was awesome.
That was shown off, which is awesome. That was shown off at like conventions years ago as like a teaser. So.
Oh really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was. Actually, it's funny because I think at one of the conventions that was actually in France, people cheered. People cheered when the Eiffel Tower went down. No, so to go from that to know that, okay, so that's how this movie's opening up. So maybe it's just going to be straight action right away, to low level, like slow. Calm down. We get to see how the world has adapted post third impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Post third. This is what drives me crazy about the rebuild movies. Post third half impact.
Yeah. So
and also post almost fourth impact.
Okay, so post that impact, we get to see how the world adapted, and it becomes, oddly enough, almost like a Studio Ghibli movie. Like, it's very.
You got that vibe too.
Yeah,
I did too, which
I did
doesn't
too. I
surprise
did.
me considering Hideaki Anno's relationship
Oh
with
yeah,
Hayao
yeah,
Miyazaki.
yeah. They're great friends, but like and it slows down, and not in a bad way. Not at
Not in a
all
bad
in a
way at
bad way.
all.
I really actually, it was a breath of fresh air, oddly enough. It
All the
was like,
character shit really happens.
I really liked what they did with the Ray there too. I really liked how she was just kind of learning the world, learning how to work and stuff like that. It was just because knowing like everything that came before this, I don't know, maybe I just like seeing the characters just live and be people.
Well, Shinji sold me on this one. Shinji and Asuka are the two that sold me on this new unit. First off, I love the fact that Toji, Kensuke, and all them, they come back. They survived.
And they're
I
like
love how
much
they get
older.
brought and
They're
they're
much older,
adults,
too.
which totally brings up another plot hole with these movies that drives me absolutely insane. But I just love Shinji in this movie in general.
Me too. Me too.
I love how slowly Shinji comes out of that slump and that scene where Asuka just has it with him and just starts shoving food down his throat is so disturbing.
Yeah, it's
it's not like it's not meant to be. It is supposed to be disturbing.
Is
You're
that
supposed to
before-
cringe at that.
Is that before or after he initially sees the collar and like gets sick?
That's after.
That's after, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, which I love that.
Yeah, that was.
I love that. But again, what really sells me on this first half of the movie is that this can be its own movie and it would work. I mean, because even if you haven't seen Kaoru get killed in You Cannot Redo, even if you don't see him get killed, you see just that flash of Shinji seeing the collar, and that makes him puke. And seeing that flash is enough for you to understand someone close to him got killed by that collar, and it's clearly fucked with him. And I'm like, this is great. And you even keep that opening Paris battle, which is awesome. Keep that opening Paris battle to sell, like, this is the world. There's these robots that people have to pilot. These kids are those pilots. Then you don't even need anything else.
Yeah,
and I really loved that. The lore in the Rebuild movies is way crazier and way too confusing for me to follow than even in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Like the show, it's actually simpler and more effective than in the movies. Like for example, I have written down later on in here, but like, why are there like 4 atoms instead of 1? Why is there more organizations other than Sele and Nerve? What the fuck is Will? There's one other thing that I was like, there's too many atoms. There's too many angels. Like in the show there's 15. Here there's like 8,892 angels for no reason at all. There's too many Evangelions. While in the freaking show there was only 3 or 4 technically.
Yeah.
And I'm like, then more is better, I guess. Not really. Man, that first act, it took me off guard. I was so happy with how slow moving. That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
I'm opening a soda.
That
was actually what I wanted. Was this first half of the movie. I was like, wow, this is great. And I love how Shinji just realizes I have to do this. And I love how he made that decision on his own.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't being told what to do. He made that decision on his own. And I love how there's consequences from the previous film. While in You Cannot Redo, because of that time skip, a lot of those consequences you kind of see but don't understand.
Yeah.
And they sort of go to the wayside as a result. This, you feel the consequences of what happened in the previous movie. Because not only are you seeing everybody's reactions to it, you are hearing them talking about it. And especially with Misato. I loved Misato in this.
Yeah, it was... Misato...
For as little as she's in it, she's not in it very much, but man... She's great.
You completely understand where Misato's head is in the moment whenever she's on screen. You know what she's thinking. You know what she has to focus on. But you also know that she does want to see Shinji again. Like.
Oh, absolutely.
She wants to, but she just knows deep down she can't.
I love how in this film you finally learn what happened to Kaji.
Yeah.
Which I wasn't expecting. You want me to be honest? I thought they were just going to forget about him. I really did. I thought they were just going to forget about him. And so when you find out that he stopped Third Impact from completing, I love that. I love how Misato was pregnant.
Yeah.
Which is something the show didn't
I wish
do.
we got to see more of his son, actually. Like, I liked his son when he was introduced.
Well, I noticed that he looked an awful lot like Shinji. And for a second there, I was like, is he going to be Shinji all grown up? And we find out that this Shinji isn't the real Shinji.
I'm glad that wasn't it.
I'm glad that wasn't it either.
Yeah, that would have been...
That would have drove me insane. But
I wish we saw a little more of him. Like, not be like a super main character or anything, but like it was cool
I
to
was
see
happy.
that.
I was happy for that because he
too.
wasn't really important, and I'm glad that the film didn't, because the film has enough characters to worry about.
Sure,
And
sure.
I'm glad the film just says this is her son, and he's estranged with Masato because of Masato's pure dedication to Will and that armada there,
Yeah,
which is her compensating for her emotions of losing Kaji and losing all these people, and Shinji in many ways. She lost
yeah,
Shinji,
yeah,
even though she's the one in 2.2, she's the one cheering him on when she's trying to save
yeah,
Rei.
yeah.
She's openly saying, "Do it,
Yep.
do it because you want to do it," and that ends up biting her in the ass. And I really love the complexity of that,
Yeah, yeah.
which feels like the show.
That
That
was
feels
actually
like
yeah.
the show.
That's a really good point. I didn't fully forget that she cheated her mom, but like yeah, that would also totally add to her character as well. Why she is the way she is in this movie, and
Yeah,
even into
she's yeah.
3.33, like it makes complete sense for
Oh,
her.
I loved her in 3.33. How you're constantly like, "What the fuck happened to her?"
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
she is so cold. When usually Masato isn't cold at all.
No, she's warm.
She's usually very warm. She's the opposite of Ritsuko, who is very cold.
Yeah,
And very calculating. Ritsuko unfortunately suffered in this movie. I don't think she had a very good. Here was the twist that kind of caught me off guard, and it kind of goes into Gendo being God, or a god, I should say. Is they almost recreated that scene in End of Evangelion where she tries to shoot Gendo,
yeah.
and I was like, oh, they're gonna redo it, and then she shoots him, and then well, bam, he's fine, and I'm like, oh, okay, that kind of caught me off
So
guard.
I actually want to comment on that really quick because that was actually kind of something I liked because I felt like Ritsuko as a character, if anyone, despite how it ends out playing out, if any character really deserved to do that to Gendo, Ritsuko was like one of my top ones. Like, yeah, I'm really glad she got a bullet in on him
Oh
at the
yeah,
very least. Like,
oh yeah.
even though we know how it plays out that he's basically God now, like but I still like that was a moment like even you could very much argue it was like a fan servicey moment, and I couldn't
It
really
was.
argue with that.
That's
But
it. Totally was.
I still really enjoyed that though. Like I think that was nice.
But essentially, this movie is broken down into 4 acts: part 1 and part 2, very similar to End of Eva. End of
Yeah.
Eva is kind of structured the same way, just with different outcomes. You have Act 1, which is basically the opening Paris scene through them finding the kids.
Yeah.
Who I forgot. Do you remember what that character's name? I forgot. Was it
Yeah, I think that is Kensuke.
Yeah, I think that was
Because
Kensuke.
Toji is the other friend.
Yeah, Toji has the black
Yep.
bluish hair, and then
Yep.
okay, yep, that was Kensuke.
Yeah, Kensuke.
Which immediately I was like, oh, like when Shinji wakes up in a hospital, and is like, I'm
Yeah.
Toji, and I'm like, ah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm glad they made a return because they just disappear in the show.
Uh,
Then you have Act 2, which is the village sequences all the way to Shinji boarding the Wonder Fleet, him
Yeah.
saying, I'm going to join this.
Yeah.
And then Act 3 is them attacking Antarctica through basically Shinji saying, I'm going to let me pilot the Eva.
I really like how with Shinji boarding the Wonder Fleet. Yes, he boards the Wonder Fleet, but everyone is literally like, "Yo, put this guy in a cell."
I
We
love
know
that.
what he has done. Like everyone's
I
pissed.
love that. To me,
I
I'm
thought
like,
that was
that makes
great.
perfect sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I just like I don't know why in the moment I was shocked by it. I'm like, I shouldn't be, but I'm like, no, that's one of the most realistic responses I could have.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I love how Shinji doesn't take it personally either.
No,
you can tell
he
how much Shinji has grown
Yeah,
since the beginning of the show in that sequence. He totally goes along with it, and he says, "I understand.
completely.
I just need to be here."
Completely. That's what made Shinji so strong in this movie is
Absolutely.
that he didn't like try and have this big dramatic speech. He was like, "No, I get it. I understand."
And no one has to tell him to get in the robot. That cliche of somebody having to say Shinji get in the goddamn robot doesn't happen in this.
Yeah. Which
I
is good
love.
because I've
I
always
love.
never been a fan of that. Never been a fan of that meme.
Well,
never
granted,
been...
that's the entire end of Evangelion.
True. True.
But anyways, and then the final act is basically Shinji versus Gendo to the ending.
Yeah, and that to me like is I think Act 3 to me it gets a little weak at times.
Yeah, Act 3 is by far the weakest part.
But then once it hits the Shinji versus Gendo arc of the movie, it just goes back full throttle and it goes fully into.
I gotta disagree with you. I think
Really?
it unfortunately, because of the overbloated fight sequences in Act 3, I think it rushes a lot of the Gendo shit. It doesn't really foreshadow any of this in
Mhm.
the other Rebuild movies. However, if this was Gendo from Neon Genesis Evangelion, it fits better.
Okay.
But it's not the Gendo from Neon Genesis
Really, because
Evangelion.
I don't know. I felt like it flowed pretty well. Like I was able to follow it along, and I thought the pacing was fine.
This is to me, this was the case, and this is a complaint with me, anyways. And I'm
Okay.
glad you certainly got more enjoyment out of that than I did. But my complaint with this is that I cared about Gendo and Shinji in this scene just because I know the characters, not
Well,
because I was invested in the movie per se.
No, that's actually that's also plays into my feelings on it too. Is because, and this is one of the big things I definitely wanted to mention during this is that for me one of the biggest highlight or like biggest moment where I was like holy fucking shit, thank you, was not the fight, but Shinji and Gendo talking. This is like groundbreaking.
That's insane.
They're having a conversation. And I think that leads into everything. And I also, that being said, the other side of me that does like big mecha anime and stuff like that, I thoroughly enjoyed the Unit 1 versus Unit 13 fight. I really
did too.
enjoyed that.
Oh, I loved how it turns out to be, and I love how they play with the idea that it's in your imagination.
Yeah.
When it turns out that it's a tokusatsu set.
Yes. Oh my god, when he
and it reveals itself when he bumps into the mat wall.
Yes, he hits the wall and it shakes. I'm like, wait,
yeah, because I was taken aback by it too, and then I was like, oh well, it's in his imagination. Wait, that's a set. Like you can see the light stands and everything like that. And I'm like, oh, I love this.
And then they go to Masato's apartment.
Yeah,
like,
well,
oh
it's
God.
like another movie set. Suddenly they're in Masato's apartment.
Yeah.
Suddenly they're in all these other, and I loved that entire
I
sequence.
thought that was awesome. Like I was.
And another part of me was like, this is, and Gendo says something like, this is a realm that you can't comprehend, almost Lovecraftian. And so, of course, they think of what, to try to comprehend what universe they're in or whatever segment that they're in. They envision themselves as Evangelions.
Yeah.
Fighting each other. And I'm like, that makes perfect sense to me.
With the lead into this too, at the end of Act 3, of Shinji deciding to pilot Eva Unit 1, that to me was another really big scene, because whenever we've seen a lot of the time Shinji all decked out in his plug suit, he does not look happy. He looks...
Well, he's not happy.
He's not happy. This time, however, and my friend mentioned this to me, and I totally agreed with him on it, he looked almost heroic.
He did. Oh, and they shoot him that way, too.
Yeah, he's shot like he's an action hero, and that was another moment where, like, as I thought about it more, I'm like, this character has deserved this for so long.
For so long.
Like,
for so long have I wanted Shinji, which isn't a problem with the show. It sounds like it's a problem with the show.
No, it's not.
And it's not. It's just this character... This isn't a typical anime at all. Even the rebuilds in themselves, it's a little more consumer friendly, but it's still not typical. It's literally dissecting the mech genre, where it's like, no, this is just a kid, and I'm going to treat him like a kid, which is the genius of Anno. I think Anno made a very genius decision doing that and treating all these characters not as archetypes or as this character should be here, and not give them arcs that follow the typical journey like you would see in a typical series. He treated them very realistically, and I love that. I absolutely love that.
Why I've always liked Shinji, and I've always liked the cast of this movie, is it's always what's bothered me when people all like get heavy-handed about Shinji being like a whiny character and stuff like that, because he's a whiny character because he's like 14.
Of course he is a whiny
having
character,
to shoulder almost the end of the world on his shoulders. It's realistic as shit, and I've never understood the complaints against his character. I really have never understood it.
No, I've never got him either, and well, I should say I understand them. I don't agree with them at all.
Yeah.
I think Shinji. I always related to Shinji the most.
Yeah.
Growing up,
and it's
like, I think that's the point for a lot of people. Well, I've noticed that people that like Shinji the most tend to relate to him the most.
Yeah, I definitely feel that, and that also plays into part to Anno as well, because when he wrote Neon Genesis, he related far more to Shinji, but in an interview he said for making Thrice Upon a Time, he started to relate more to Gendo.
I read that too, and I was like, holy shit, that explains a lot.
That makes so much, and you see it in this movie too. Because we really kind of, even though it has been explained before, Gendo's kind of like backstory and reasonings for what it is, I think this really cemented it to me. It really helped.
I agree.
really helped
I agree.
really understand what really made Gendo tick as a character.
That was one of the things with the original show and End of Eva that I personally really liked, was how Gendo was such a fucking mystery. Like, even in, I believe it's either 21 or 22, which is sort of Feudski's backstory. It would have been so easy to instead jump into Gendo's head for those flashbacks, but I love how Anno said, no, it's got to be Feudski.
Yeah.
It's got to be a third party. And I love that. It just gave him a whole lot of depth. And he still gets his comeuppance in End of Evangelion, and I love how he gets... It's like his character in what happens to his character in the End of Evangelion fits that interpretation of Gendo.
Yeah.
While what happens in Thrice fits this interpretation of Gendo, because there is more interaction between Shinji and Gendo throughout the rebuilds than there was in End of Eva, or Neon Genesis to show and End of Evangelion. Too many Evangelions. I love it. Don't get me wrong, but it kind of irks me from like looking at this as somebody who wouldn't be a fan. Okay. You know, I was trying to think about what a general audience think of this.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
The fact that Shinji, when he decides, hey, you're right, I'm not going to beat you in a fight, so I'm just not going to fight you, which I loved.
Yeah.
I loved. I mean, that's almost harkening back to Star Wars. This isn't anything groundbreaking, but it's just really well done. When suddenly you see Shinji sitting across from Gendo in the train.
Yeah.
And I'm like, as somebody who's been watching the show, has watched everything Evangelion.
It's huge.
That's huge, because now suddenly Shinji has turned the tables. He's now using what he's experienced and what he's learned and thought throughout the entire show, throughout the entire movies, and is turning it and using it on Gendo.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's growth. That's development. That's what I've wanted to see. However, in the rebuild movies, Shinji has not had that happen. The train sequences of Gendo and Shinji, or Shinji sitting in a train looking at each other, does not really happen in the rebuild movies at all. There's no justification for why Shinji is sitting there saying, this is how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do to you, what I've experienced, and let you go through the same thing that I did. But if that was Shinji from the show, it would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, I actually, that did not initially occur to me.
Now, everyone's going to think that this sounds like I'm shitting on it. I loved it. I want to be clear.
Because you don't have to blindly praise something to like something. You can admit fault at times, which actually I didn't really even take note of this, because you're right. I don't think there is the train stuff at all in the rebuilds.
I think there is one scene in 2.2. That's him on a train, but that train is a reoccurring image on the show.
Yeah, like that's a huge thing in the original show. But I think that also, now the other side of the spectrum is, well, definitely, for a viewer who's just watching this movie, they won't really understand the impact of that. At the same time,
as a viewer who's watched it from the beginning,
as a viewer watch it, we know it's huge, but also at the same time, I think it's also very clear that this piece is made for longtime viewers.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
So it's that it's that area, that gray area where it's like, okay, so we're making the finale to a series that's been going on for years, but at the same time, we also want to, at the very least, try and make it a followable piece, where it's like, I don't really know what the answer to that is.
That's just it. It's a tightrope, which is good and bad.
Yeah.
Because me as a director, I tend to hate that. I tend to hate when somebody tries to walk this middle of the road. And to be honest, I think that holds this movie back from being truly great, is that tightrope. To me, my logic would say, no, this has to be rebuild. This has to be rebuild. This can't be hearkening to Neon Genesis Evangelion or Evangelion. I have to make it its own thing. I have to make it involved with the rebuilds and focus on the rebuilds. But because it's Hideaki Anno, there's usually a different story there. It is hard to say. I agree with you. I don't really know what the answer is.
And like, there's also, like, for me, there was stuff too where it's like, I'm always one person who's always like trying to be like, I don't mind like fan service stuff and self-referential stuff. I don't usually mind that unless it's too on the nose, and you know when it's too on the nose.
I really don't like fan service.
When it's like a Marvel movie is making a character quote something from a previous movie, like that's too on the nose, and that's too. And for me, this movie does partially something like that in the third impact scene, which is kind of a recreation of it from End of Evangelion, where they do
Yes,
the big Ray motifs again, but it's in like CG this time.
That actually segues because we're actually kind of talking about the story right now, which I have later in the notes, but we might as well, since we're naturally sort of segueing into it.
Yeah.
That is my biggest complaint with this movie. Now, you said something very interesting to me a while back when Joker was coming out.
Really?
You said, and it's always sunk in with me, is that you think Joker is being held back by the fact that it has to be a Joker movie.
Yes. Yes.
I thought this movie got held back because it has to be an Evangelion movie. Because there's a shit ton of scenes lifted full cloth, or referenced full cloth, from End of Evangelion. And I was sitting there saying, if it didn't do Giant Naked Ray, or any of that, it probably would have been a better movie. It just, instead of it trying to be like, I have to use these images because End of Evangelion did it, which is how I saw those sequences. If it just said, no, we're going to make this completely different, completely new, it would have worked better.
It's another case for me with like the sequence we're talking about right now, is that the problem I had with it was that it did just feel like it was trying to do the visuals from...
Including the music, too. It used another classical piece, and I was like, you guys didn't need to do that.
And
in fact, me sitting there, I was distracted by it.
It felt like to me, like, but the thing is, though, at the same time, we do need to understand that the way Rey is in this universe is that I feel like that was something that was inevitably going to happen again, where it's...
Oh, that she was going to become a giant naked Rey?
Yeah, that it was going to happen again.
I was really hoping that it wouldn't have happened. I was like, oh, really?
See, I initially thought, because right before all that starts happening, there's the stuff with Asuka.
I thought Asuka was going to be it.
Yeah, I thought that too. That's 100%
me too.
what I thought too. Which I don't know about you, I liked that sequence a lot too. I loved the animation when she actually takes the eye patch off, the angel is coming out of the eye. I liked that entire sequence a lot. Uh-oh.
I wasn't a big fan of that. Look, it wasn't bad.
No, I know.
No, it wasn't bad. I thought it was very good for what it was doing, and I was on board. That's the key thing with this, is I was on board. This isn't like me with Godzilla vs. Kong, where I said everything I liked is terrible, but I liked it because it was dumb. No, I genuinely liked it. I genuinely liked it. I didn't love it. What was going on with Asuka, only because I just think what they did in End of Eva was so fucking good.
That's the other side of the spectrum.
And way more tragic.
Yeah.
What ends up happening to Asuka in End of Eva is just so much more tragic.
Yeah, but like to really kind of sum up that sequence in total is that like I definitely think visually it was interesting at times, but it just like, again, the problem is it just felt like they were doing that sequence from End of Evangelion, and as we've talked about before, to me, End of Evangelion is just something I did not expect this movie to even top.
There was no in this sequence. There was no Asuka going like, Mom is here. Yeah. She loves me. She's here with me. There was none of that. There was just her being like, I've got to do this, and which makes her a more interesting or a more independent character for sure. Which, that all being said, I think Asuka is the one area in the rebuild movies that I vastly prefer to the show. I hate her in the show.
Yeah,
I don't like her until episode 22 of Evangelion and End of Evangelion.
I definitely didn't. I didn't like hate her in the show, but yeah, that was always another thing. Is like Asuka was the tsundere of the group.
She is a cunt. There, I said it. I love how also in these, I just love how every single one of these characters had their moment, no matter big or small. I love how the characters of Will, such as a lot of those characters that you saw that would be like the underlings in Nerve HQ and stuff like that, reading and typing all the reports and stuff like that, they have their scenes in this movie. Like, I love how they're the ones running the Paris excavation. Like, they've grown, they've been promoted, they've learned from their experiences over the past 15 years. And I loved all that stuff, and I loved the world building here and stuff like that. This is the stuff that I like about Evangelion. And at the same time, it also got like super existential, which is typical Evangelion. It's confusing as fuck. My issue with a lot of that, and that fight scene in particular, the fight scene in Antarctica drives me insane. But End of Eva, the fight scene between Asuka and the dummy units, the dummy Evas, you feel the weight
Oh yeah,
of her
yeah,
smashing the boat into one, or her getting shot with
yeah,
missiles, or getting stabbed with the Lance of Longinus, and you feel the weight of what's happening, and it's
yeah,
why it's one of the
yeah,
greatest animated sequences ever.
yeah, yeah.
In this, there was I never had, and this was a problem that I had in 3.33 and in this movie, is that I was like, there's just so much happening that I don't know what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think it kind of plays into, and we've talked about this when we talked about Godzilla and stuff, where there's just in a lot of modern cinema, there's always this mentality of bigger is better,
Bigger is
bigger,
better.
yeah, and it's sometimes it works, but a lot of the times it's not needed at times.
No, I don't
It's
think it's
yeah,
needed for End of Evangelion, or I'm
yeah,
sorry, for Evangelion. In fact,
yeah,
that was one of the things that I loved about the show in particular, was how grounded the violence was.
yeah.
And it really sits with you.
I
Like
mean,
when somebody, like in End of Evangelion, when somebody from Nerve gets shot, it's not like they turn into a blood pinata.
no,
You see a little bit of blood come out of them, but you feel the pain
yeah.
of the whole thing. And like Asuka getting torn apart, you feel that.
And then also, like, I mean, like for me, it's in the original show. I believe it's not the Toji scene. It's when Avian Unit 1 goes berserk and it roars. That
Oh,
roar still haunts me. To like, I
oh
still
yeah. Well,
think
the
about
the
that. Like,
Japanese one in particular haunts me to no
yeah,
end.
yeah,
The
it's yeah.
Japanese
That's what I'm
roar,
talking about.
which was actually Shinji's voice actor. Shinji's voice actor was actually an actress,
Yeah,
but was actually her yelling. It was her screaming
yeah,
into a microphone, and I'm like,
yeah,
oh, that's so perfect.
yeah. It's great. Like
It's terrifying.
yeah,
The first action scene in Paris needed to be over the top and insane, I think, to just show how crazy the universe is for newcomers.
mhm.
But when we started getting into the bajillions of Evangelion, the bajillions of angels,
Yeah, and they're all like ships.
yes, and
Yeah,
they're all
yeah,
like ships, I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at anymore.
yeah. It's I can understand where you're coming from with
Yeah,
that.
and that's just a problem I
Yeah.
have with
No, I can
all of
get
the
it.
movies. Actually,
Yeah.
all the movies tend to have this. I think 1.1 has the best depictions of angel battles because I can still visualize everything that's happening.
It's
It doesn't
also
go apeshit insane.
1.1 is like the most like adaptation of the original show in comparison to all of them,
It's
so it
also,
helps.
ironically, it's also my least favorite of the rebuild movies.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
but I was like, I can at least visualize what's happening and understand what's going on. At
yeah.
least in the show, when it starts getting into the more crazy images and the abstractness of it, it's like a slow build up to it.
Mhm.
And while right from the get go, in all of these movies, it seems like more, and that is the answer to everything. More angels, more explosions, more Evangelions,
Yeah,
and I'm like, I miss the simplicity. But it's so weird me saying that. I miss the simplicity of the show.
yeah.
And I miss how there's only three main Avas, four Avas in total,
17,
and
17 angels, I
15.
believe. 15.
15.
Okay.
Karu was the 15th. And so while the story and presentation of the rebuild movies is more straightforward, the lore is a lot more insane. And there's a lot of stuff that I wish they explained and
Yeah,
didn't, that they should have explained, and then there's stuff that
yeah.
shouldn't have been explained that they explain, that I'm not a big fan of. While
I definitely.
the show is far more,
Yeah.
and then I'll let you say what you're going to say. The story is not straightforward at all. It's far stranger presented, but yet the lore is a lot more straightforward.
Yeah.
There's a lot, like, you can grasp it a little bit more than you
Mhm.
could in the rebuild movie.
There is an issue in the movie, like a very issue. For me, it's kind of slight, where it is a lot of like more action, more
Mhm.
thousands of angels on screen, and I get that, and I can get the turn off to that. However, I didn't let it bother me too much because then
Me
when we
neither, by
got
the way.
yeah, I figured when we got to the actual interpersonal character stuff, that weight was still there to me, and like when it was more like the one-on-one, like the Gendo and Shinji like Unit 13 Unit 1 fight.
Well, that's what Evangelion was always good at.
Yeah,
Evangelion was always good at that shit, and so
yeah.
was this.
There's definitely like a lot of stuff I did. I admit I had to look up some stuff afterwards. And I was like, oh, okay, so that was that. Specifically, it was I got a little lost on the moon scene with Kaoru, and there's the coffins. I actually kind of was briefly a little confused. I
Oh,
was
I'm
like,
still confused by that.
yeah, I was like, so there's okay, and
But
even now
that's
I'm still like a little.
there's an atom on the moon.
Yeah, yeah,
Adam is the white moon. Lilith is the black moon.
yeah, yeah,
So far as I know, there's only one Lilith in the rebuild series,
yeah.
but there's at least 4 atoms.
Mhm.
which makes no sense to me. Yeah, I really like it. So let's go into the characters since we've been talking about the characters.
Oh, I really liked Hikari. That's Toji's sister, right?
Yes.
She's the one who almost fires a bullet into Shinji.
Into Shinji, and Masato gets in the way. I was so nervous that Masato was going to die in that sequence,
Yeah,
just like
yeah,
she did in End of Eva,
yeah, yeah,
and I'm glad she didn't. I'm glad
yeah.
she didn't.
And
Masato's sacrifice is very good, and it
and
made
it's
sense to me.
with Hikari too. That was realistic. Like I would understand why she did that because
Absolutely.
again, as we've said to nauseum, everyone knows what Shinji is, and Shinji gets it. So it's like,
Oh yeah, and I love how Shinji. I love the look on Shinji's face in that scene. He doesn't want to get shot, but he just sort of stands there and is like, "Don't do this.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing." First person I want to talk about is Asuka.
Yeah.
Because, and as I said earlier, she is the one thing in the rebuild movies that I think the rebuilds did far better than in the show. The fact that she admits that she at one time had feelings for Shinji says a lot about her growth.
Yeah.
Immediately, in just a
Totally.
line. The thing that bugs me about this is I guess she's not, because she refers to everyone as Lilin.
Mm-hmm.
I guess she's an angel now, in that she's not the Asuka from the first two movies. She's a different Asuka.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true or not, but from how she talks and how she refers to them as the original,
Yeah. Yeah.
it makes me think that she's not Asuka, the Asuka from the first two movies, that she's a clone or an angel.
Which also kind of pays in tribute to the eye patch, and that when she takes eye patch off, there is an angel there. That's
That was an angel? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
So
what
that
was.
yeah, you're pretty much there for the most part with it.
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't quite understand that. In fact, that's a problem I have with this movie, is how it sort of hints. I'm not saying it's necessarily true, but at least my interpretation of a lot of the scenes is that it hints that the three main characters, Rei, Shinji, and Asuka, are not the originals. Well, Shinji is the original, but Rei certainly isn't, and Asuka certainly isn't. And
Yeah.
Rei, I knew, of course.
Yeah, Rei
wasn't
is
the original.
Yeah.
Asuka, I was like, well, that kind of deflates her arc, doesn't it? Her being a completely new person.
True.
She's not the character from the previous movie, and I don't know if that's true or not. The lore is so fucking needlessly confusing on this.
See, yeah, so I interpreted it because I wanted to just partially course correct myself a little bit in case for some reason I'm wrong. But yeah, I did interpret it as like that is she has an angel in her now, but I still thought it was the original Asuka. I know what you're saying, that it was like there's a lot of stuff that makes it seem like, but I still think it was the original Asuka.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've never liked the Curse of the Eva. I like the concept of there being a Curse of the Eva, but I don't like the fact that they stay 14 forever.
Yeah, I will be real. I actually kind of forgot about that initially when I first started watching. I was like,
"Oh,
wait,
I did too.
How come they all aged and they didn't?" Oh, right,
yeah,
that's a
Eva.
thing.
Which, by the way, that's something that we didn't talk about in the story. Is I've always interpreted that as the end when we see Shinji grown up with what's her name?
Mari.
Mari.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad. I love what they did with her in this as well.
Me too.
I think the ending is supposed to be interpreted as, with Shinji rejecting all the Evangelions, it's basically now a reset and everything is normal. It's basically our world now.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's what that ending is supposed to mean.
That's kind of how I interpreted it too.
It's not. It doesn't mean that suddenly Shinji rejects it and now this is the world rebuilt.
Yeah.
It means that there has been a hard reset, and this is what has happened.
I really liked. I know we're talking about the characters. I actually didn't bring this scene up, and I wanted to. The scene when Gendo takes the sphere, and instead of having Shinji put the sphere into him, he takes the sphere, and then Yui comes in. They impale together, and then one by one, you see each like Ava get Ava, Angel throughout the whole series. I loved that fucking sequence.
Oh, I love that too. I
thought
love
that
the
was
imagery
great.
of the. Well, I think it fit too.
Yeah, yeah.
It
totally.
fit perfectly. And I love how Yui and Gendo do that together. That hit me harder than it being with the Angels.
Yeah.
It was the fact that it was Gendo and Yui
it was beautiful
doing it
because
together.
like Gendo, in the end, despite being a bad guy, kind of got a little bit what he wanted.
Well, I love the idea that Gendo was so obsessed with reuniting with Yui that he loses sight of who Yui is.
Yeah, yeah.
And they do that in the show. They do that in End of Evangelion, but it is much better. It's better handled here than it is in the movie, than in End of Evangelion.
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh my god, that scene. I got chills on the scene where I think Shinji, charges Gendo, and suddenly an AT field pops up.
Yeah, yeah,
And Gendo's like, why is there an AT field here? I should not have an AT field here.
yeah, yeah.
It's because he's scared of Shinji.
Yep,
I
yep.
loved that
Yep.
moment. I got
That was-
chills. I
that was
like,
great.
oh, this is great. But yeah, Asuka, she goes through her own little arc. And I think she's better. Her arc completes better in the show with what happens to her in End of Evangelion. But you know, she dies.
Yeah.
In this.
Yeah.
A little let down with Asuka, but not completely. I was just happy that she got somewhat of a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then not getting torn apart. What about Rey? You mentioned before, and this is where you can really get into it. You mentioned earlier that you really loved what was going on with Rey.
I did,
particularly in the first half.
I did, and it's heartbreaking too, because it's like we actually get to see this Rey that basically learned the world. We get to see that the world that isn't just like her having to pilot an Ava unit and just not be like a mindless zombie to Nerve or something like that. She just gets to see how the world works. She gets to learn how the world works, what a baby is, what work is, what feelings are, and that's what
that
makes it.
Note kills me, by the way.
Which
note
one?
Where she writes, "Good morning, goodbye, thank you." She says all of the statements that are terms of endearment. She writes them all on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
She makes sure that Hikari sees it. She puts it right in the center of the floor.
Yeah.
I loved that. That hit me hard.
That's what makes it so hard when like the scene shows up and because she keeps going to Shinji. Like every day she's going to Shinji to give him food.
Well, I love how she doesn't quite understand why.
Yeah.
And it's because of the previous versions of her that keep saying, and they do this in the show as well, when the first, not the first Rey, but the main Rey that is throughout the majority of the series dies.
Yeah.
She keeps like she's holding, I believe, Gendo's glasses, and she breaks them. Mm-hmm. And she's also crying, and she doesn't understand why she's crying. She just knows that she's feeling something. That's shit that I love, and they do that in this, and I really like that. But the moment where she realizes she's going to die, she can't live without LCL, the primordial soup. I was expecting Shinji to completely revert back to normal. I'm sorry, revert back into depression and sadness when he sees Rey dissolve in front of him.
Yeah,
I love how he doesn't. It's almost like that's what gives him the final push to end it all.
Yeah.
It's like, I've got to end this.
Yeah.
Yes, this is awesome. This is character growth.
Yeah. No, it's cool. You said really for the most part what I feel about it. I like how Rey was portrayed in this movie. I like that arc of her like just learning things. It was very cute. I really liked it, and I don't really have much else to say. I liked how they handled Rey. I think it was a nice send-off to that character as well, who apparently is alive at the end of the movie, if I'm right, unless I missaw that.
Yes, Asuka's alive. Everyone's alive. Everyone should be alive, because I guess the universe has completely reset, which goes into the idea. Both the show and the movies say that this is a cycle.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Shinji has broken the cycle so that when it starts over, it's now us today, basically. You know.
Yeah, it makes me happy to see that even that character gets to have a future and everything too.
Yes, yes.
A character that was made to just be almost like fodder to dummy plug Evangelion units.
Well, that's exactly what she was. She was made to be cannon fodder.
It made me happy.
And then in the show, she gets replaced with Kaoru.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's Kaoru's essence that pilots, quote unquote, pilots and powers the dummy Avas.
Yeah.
Which was going to be her. So it's very tragic and everything like that. But we've talked about Shinji a lot. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about Shinji?
I just like that Shinji finally had his moment.
Yes.
Really finally had his moment to show that he's not just a whiny character, because he's not. He's realistic. He's a realistic character. And to see him grow and to see him get through all these insecurities he's had, all this hell he has seen.
Well, to quote the movie, he acts like an adult.
Yeah.
And I love that. He grew up.
Yeah. And that's what makes it, like, even the opening of the movie, too, is, like, despite, like, I know why he just wants to quarter himself off away from everyone, why he's eating just barely eating, and then when he's actually eating, he's almost crying while he's eating because he wants to die, but at the
Love
same
that
time
scene.
he wants to stay alive at the same time.
Oh, well, he's
It's
scared.
yeah,
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 and I love that because I
yeah.
totally related to him there.
It's great. Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard
And
scene to swallow, but
it is a
it's
harsh
really
scene to
nice.
swallow. Him and being force fed by Asuka too is a
Yeah,
very hard scene to swallow.
yeah. It's
Shot very weirdly
yeah.
and very
It was scary.
unnervingly,
It was like
but
it
it
was
was very
scary.
good,
Like
very
yeah,
effective. I should
yeah,
say, very
yeah.
effective.
And also like just I mentioned this already, but it really was like after I thought about it more, I'm like, yeah,
Seeing
that's
him wear the original plug suit while all the other characters had stopped wearing the
yeah.
original plug suits a while ago was awesome.
The original plug suit, and he's standing there proud. He's standing there
Yes,
ready to
finally.
take this on, and I think that's something that character has needed, and I'm really
hmm
happy he got to have
hmm
that send off. And
Because in End of Evangelion, it's a lot more abstract. He doesn't really have that awe moment. He gets it when he strangles Asuka
yeah,
in that scene when he starts screaming and standing up for himself.
yeah,
That's where it begins in the End of Eva. Here, it's much more blatantly shown.
yeah.
It's less. There's no. I mean, there is room for interpretation. Don't get me wrong, but it's very clear that
Yeah.
this is
And
what has
I feel
happened.
like
This is
to
where
an
he is.
extent, I kind of, even though again I love End of Evangelion, I kind of liked how Shinji played out a little more in this movie to an extent.
I do too.
I think I really
hmm
do like that he really got to take control of his life, and it
Well, the fact that he was able to take what his experiences and reverse it and
yeah,
use it against Gendo,
yeah,
I loved.
me too.
Like, you have no idea how much I'm sitting there like, I think I said it out loud too. I was like, I fucking love this.
And then I really like the sequence where it's almost like it was almost kind of a nod to the final episodes of the original show where like the budget is a lot lower and it's like it's
hmm
storyboards and everything.
Yes. Yep.
And I really like that too. But yeah, Shinji, I think to me really is the highlight of this movie as I feel like it should have been.
It should have been.
Yeah,
Yes.
it should have
Evangelion
been.
has always been a show with Shinji.
Yeah,
Shinji has always been the protagonist, and that's how it should be.
yeah.
Let's talk about the big guy, Gendo. We've been talking about him a lot,
Gendo.
but oh boy, was that a loop.
Yeah,
That was a fucking loop. That made me do a double take. I was, well, not really a double take, but I was kind of like, oh, they're doing this? Oh my.
yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, I dug. I know you said you weren't big on it. I dug the him basically becoming God, getting shot in the head, and then picking up his brain and putting it back in.
Well,
I,
look, with Evangelion, there's
yeah,
a lot of big pills you have to swallow, and you do. That was just one too much.
I
It was a
understand.
little
No,
too much for me.
I get it. I understand. For me, it worked though because I honestly just think the visual is really cool. Um, but yeah, with Gendo too, is that like it's the entire fight and dash conversation between Shinji to me is just such a feast. I loved every second of that.
Everything with him and Shinji was gold.
Yeah,
Gold.
it's
Utter gold.
yep.
Which it needed to be. It should have been.
Yeah.
And it's quite clear that Anno knew he had to focus on that. And he did. It's quite clear that he put a lot of energy into the conversations that happened between the two of them.
Yeah.
That just threw me for a big loop. That genuinely just surprised me.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, too. It's not like it's exactly thrown out of left field. Like I
I
said
thought it made
earlier, his
sense.
character, it makes sense why he would feel the same way as Shinji. He is Shinji.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
going through the exact same shit as Shinji.
And he's never had, like Shinji, he has never really had any way to deal with it.
No.
He
No.
really has not had a proper output to deal with it. But now that Shinji has finally figured out his way to deal with it, that's almost like a catalyst to him to realize how to deal with it. And I
Well,
like
Shinji guides him into the
Yeah.
light, essentially.
it's a father learning from son. Like, and I think that's, especially for that father and son pair, I think that's something really special.
You've got to read the manga.
Okay.
I do agree with you there. I think what happens to Gendo in the series plus End of Evangelion fits that Gendo,
Yeah.
while this ending kind of fits this interpretation of Gendo a little bit more. It's like on one hand I'm like, yes, I love it because I'm a fan of Evangelion. And then there's another part of me who's like, yeah, but narratively it doesn't really make any sense. and it's relying too much on the fact that, yes, it knows that I'm a fan of Evangelion,
True.
when it should be trying to stand on its own. And that also goes into Fuyutsuki, by the way, how he dies, how he gets turned into soup.
Yeah, I wish he had a little more of a send-off, too. That was one... I'm
Well,
glad you brought that
Fuyutsuki,
up.
I've never complained with him not having too much of a character. Like, he has a character in the show.
Yeah.
Like, the flashback sequences are wonderful, but it's not like he's a deep character. He's very much... He almost kind of reminds me of Darth Vader, where he's sort of like the emotionless lackey that's like, this is my fate. This is what I have to do because I can't change the course of history.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it whether I like it or not.
I understand that. I just felt like in End of Evangelion there was a little more.
There is a lot more with him in the show than in the movies. But again, him turning into like LCL goes into what I said earlier. I just love turning him into soup. Is Tang. Absolutely.
Tang, my man.
That was another case of oh yeah, this is a conclusion to Evangelion. We need to put in a couple of End of Eva references. And I'm like, you could have made that stand on its own. Yeah, Ritsuko, I do love the fact that she gets to shoot Gendo, but she doesn't really have a character in any of these, really.
Yeah,
she was another sacrifice that was made because these are movies. While in the show, she is certainly a character.
She is a character, yeah.
With a lot of nuance.
Yep.
The fact that she dyes her hair isn't really explored in the rebuilds. The fact that her mother built the Magi and killed herself on the Magi isn't in the rebuilds, really. Basically, her entire backstory, it's hinted at, but it's clearly the impact isn't there.
Yeah.
And so she's kind of reduced to this two-dimensional lackey character, for lack of a better term, no pun intended. And that was a bit of a letdown because she's so wonderful in the show.
Yeah.
That was another case where I'm like, yeah, this is clearly made for the fans, not so much narratively. Doesn't make sense. When she gets a shot at Gendo, you get the sense that the anger is very... Narratively, it makes sense why she's angry at Gendo because of everything that's happened between the 15 years. But fan-wise, you're like, thank God, because we know of what Gendo did to her because of NGE. Yeah, and that's how it's presented within the movie.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work because in the rebuild movies, we don't know any of that. Any of it.
Yeah.
We don't know of her past relationships and sexual exploits with Gendo. Well, in the show, we certainly do, which makes that sequence in End of Eva, where she gets shot and dies, the more tragic.
Yeah.
And it's been building to that moment. And her mother betrays her, and that is such a terrible scene, but in the best possible way. It is awful.
It definitely is a shame that they didn't really dive more into her, but like you said, I think that's partially because they're movies.
But like the whole thing with Toji, like in the show, it's Toji that's in Eva Unit 04, I believe.
Yeah.
When all that shit happens, while in the rebuilds, it's Asuka, and that's a change that I actually got on board with. Because I'm like, well, we don't have the time to, add depth to this character. We'll just make it Asuka. And I'm like, okay. I understand a change like that, and I'm actually on board changes like that.
Yeah.
The show could afford to show you the building relationship between Shinji and Kaji and... Shinji and Toji and Kensuke. Well, the movies did not. They could not.
Yeah, I agree. Then I also do like how Toji, Kensuke, and Hikari are characters. We do see them grow throughout these movies too, both figuratively and literally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just nice to see that they're not characters who are thrown to the wayside because they're not like Eva pilots.
Well, it works with the rebuild films.
Yeah,
it works brilliantly with the rebuild films. I love how we see them progress and grow as people, and that it kind of fits who their characters were hinted to be. Because Kensuke tended to like to be on his own playing war hero, war stories, which is what he does in the movies, except he's more of a scavenger. He's often alone, and he likes being alone, and that's what he was like in the show and in the movies. While Toji was more of a people person. He was kind of gruff and rough around the edges, but he was a people person, which is why I love the fact that he's a doctor.
Yeah.
To me, that just made sense. Completely on that. I love how when a baby is born in that village, it's like a huge deal.
Yeah, but
everyone's really happy about it. Doesn't matter what type of day they were having. I love how literally everyone in that village was like another baby was born. It was like, it really hits how awful and how terrifying that this universe is, that is something that makes everybody happy.
Yeah, even on the other side of the coin with that too is that like it's oddly comforting that it's
Exactly.
like all this
It's
shit
clearly
has happened.
It's a post-apocalypse.
Yeah, and humanity could be like monsters, but they're just happy a new baby is born.
I love that.
Like it's very touching. Oddly,
It was very touching.
Yeah.
And it really was. And I love how, to parallel that, you see that the cat has also given birth.
Yeah, the cat birth too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the parallel line. I've always been a fan of parallel lines in my movies where things kind of parallel each other, characters parallel each other. This is chock full of it. We've talked about a lot of it already.
Like I said before, just because you're complaining about something you liked doesn't mean you hate it. Like you like it.
This is definitely my favorite of the Rebuild movies.
I think it's the strongest of all.
Yeah, I think this is genuinely, if only for that first act. Sorry, the first half.
Yeah.
I'm just like, that first half is strong as fuck. Like, that was tight.
Yeah.
Oh, and it was so needed because, like, 3.3, the other movies were, like, moving at, like, a breathneck pace, like, throughout the entire films, and then all of a sudden this happens.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I can breathe.
Yeah, because I think that's another thing, too, is, like, everyone was so used to these Rebuild movies being kind of like way more action focused.
Way more action focused.
So to see like, and I think I said this kind of before, but to see that this movie basically after the first action sequence then stops and just lets you kind of take everything in, I think it's very cathartic. It's very like, okay, all right, there's some terrible things.
Again, that's what I love about the show. The show has tons of those moments. There'll be insane action, and then all of a sudden it'll slow down for 2 episodes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, thank God. Like the first episode where, I think it's episode 4, where Shinji runs away.
Yeah.
Just to be on his own. I'm like, there's no action in that at all. There's hardly any dialogue in that episode. And it's so good at fleshing out the universe, fleshing out these characters. And that's what Hideaki Anno does the best.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I don't think that's what Hideaki Anno does best. I think that's what Evangelion has always done best.
Yeah.
Is stuff like that. And that's why you love the show.
I feel like Ava has always done a good job of just like giving more time to characters that aren't the main like the entire main cast, like smaller characters, like again, I know I said them already, but for the Rebuild specifically, like Toji and Kensuke. They characters that could have easily been thrown away once shit starts happening, but no, we get to see what they're doing and see that they're progressing as well.
And I have to mention that they do kind of just disappear in the show.
Yeah.
After the thing with Toji.
Yeah.
But it fits the show.
True.
The fact that suddenly they're gone and had to be evacuated, but Shinji had to stay, works. And how that affects Shinji negatively works in the show. But what they do in the movies is different, and it works with the movies.
Yeah.
Which I like. That's stuff that I truly, truly, truly like. Which, by the way, the fact that was Toji, the moment that they said that was Toji, a big shitting, I was like, oh yeah, he lived.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's, I think, props to the show. If it made me have that emotion, because normally if something like that happens, I'm like, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
This, I was happy. The last character I want to talk about, if that's okay with you, is Mari.
Oh, Mari.
Because I hated her in the first 3 movies. I thought she was the most pointless character ever. I loved her in this.
Yeah, I liked Mari too.
I also liked that she was kind of a comic relief, and unlike in the other movies where I thought the comic relief was not needed, I love how there's so much emotions going on in this movie to kind of laugh at a joke or watching her sing while she's destroying, kicking Ava ass.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I can get on board with this. A little bit of levity in the insanity.
Yeah, no, I was a fan of Mari. I liked Mari for the most part through the movies. I definitely was confused as to her place in the movies. That was my thing where it was like, I don't really know what we're doing with this character. Even up to the third one, I'm like, what are we doing with you? But I also had to, at the same time, be like, just trust Anno. I'm sure this will come together somehow in a nice way. And I think it did. I think it came through in a meaningful way.
I'm a little confused with her relationship with Gendo.
That is a little fuzzy on me, too.
I think they were trying to do a Ritsuko with her a bit. But if that was the case, why didn't they just do it with Ritsuko?
Yeah, it's that I'm a little fuzzy on too. It's also like the whole the whole age thing throws me off too. That it's like, wait, so that means how she was how old then? And then
She's
she's
been 14 for a lot longer than any of the other characters,
yeah.
which is disturbing.
Yeah, it's a little weird. A little weird.
Yes, it's very weird. So this film also unintentionally or intentionally, I don't know, it's Anno, destroyed the shippers because
Yeah.
it said, "Screw you. He's not going to get with Asuka, and he's not going to get with Rey. He's going to have a thing with her."
My friend, can I really quick? My friend, after I texted my friend, I was like, "Oh hey, I finally finished it." He just messages me, "Mari Bros, we won."
No, I don't know how I feel about that. For
Yeah,
the record,
I'm a little fuzzy on that too, but
for the record, I'm glad he didn't end up with Rey or Asuka. I said both of those relationships are poisonous. I wouldn't go in there.
Yeah.
However, if I was to ship quote unquote one, it would be him and Kaoru.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I'm in that camp too. I'm with you on
him.
that
Well,
too.
he's just perfect with Kaoru.
Yeah, it's
Well,
just...
even if Kaoru is sexually attracted to Shinji, and Shinji isn't attracted to Kaoru in that way, it makes sense why he would lean towards Kaoru regardless, just because of how warm Kaoru has been to him.
Yeah.
Let's look at it. Rey has no emotions at all,
Yeah.
or has very little. She's learning the emotions. Asuka's just a bitch.
Yeah.
Misato is warm, but also an adult. The age gap is always present.
Yeah.
Ritsuko's cold.
Yeah.
Gendo's certainly cold. So suddenly episode 24 comes along and hey, here's this guy who's like, I want to be your friend.
Yeah.
Let's talk. Let's hang out, especially with everybody else is gone.
Yeah.
No wonder why Shinji sort of leaps on that friendship and grabs a hold of it. Makes perfect sense to me, and that's what happens in 3.33, and I loved all of it.
Yeah, I've always been in the camp of like Shinji and Kaoru too. I just feel like it was almost intentional. I don't want to make any judgment calls like that, but it felt natural to me with those two characters. It really felt like I felt a connection there with them.
Apparently, the Netflix series changed my favorite line in the entire thing. Apparently, they subtitled it as "Oh, I really like you."
Yeah,
when it's quite clear.
Yeah.
It is quite clear when you're listening to the Japanese dialogue. He's saying, "I love you."
The Netflix adaptation, while I'm thankful, it finally puts Ava back in like our territory to watch.
Very happy about that.
It was weird. Like besides,
I never watched the dub, but
it's the dub was like, I've grown to appreciate the original dub for the show way more, considering I think for the dub for Thrice Upon a Time they got all the original voice actors back. Yeah, that's to me that's a feat in its own right. Like even though I prefer the Japanese, I think the Japanese cast is unrivaled when it comes to Evangelion.
I agree.
I've grown to appreciate the original cast. I think it's ADV cast.
The ADV dubs, yes. Yeah. Yep.
I've grown to appreciate them and their passion for these characters just as much.
Well, that's what I have. I have those special edition DVDs that have all of the ADV dubs on them.
Yeah.
And that's what I have on DVD sets, and I'm glad that I have them.
Yeah.
They also include the director's cuts of episodes 21 through 24, which I know a lot of people haven't seen because they're not available on Netflix. It's the regular television cuts.
Yeah.
If you can, watch the director's cuts to those episodes. They are phenomenal, and they genuinely add a lot of stuff to it. It's episode 15 or 24 are my two favorite episodes. I usually can't decide on which ones I like more.
I mean, for me, one of my favorites from the show is still, I don't remember the number, but it's the one where AV Unit 1 goes berserk. That whole scene, I love that
That's
scene.
around 15.
That's around 15.
I think it's a little after.
Yeah, all the visuals in that scene I love. It's so scary when it happens.
You don't like the episode where Asuka and Shinji have to abort a baby angel fetus in a volcano?
No, because I actually remember that being one of the episodes I I very rarely check out on things, but like that was the one I was just like, oh, can we just...
Yeah, that's kind of a what if episode. The episode stands out only because they are clearly giving an angel fetus an abortion.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that stands out from that episode.
That and also the line, when things get hot, they expand.
They expand.
That's the one other thing that's... I was never that big of a fan of that episode.
Evangelion is many things. Subtle is not one of them.
True. At the same time, I wouldn't sell it off like that. I think it can be subtle at times.
It can be. Absolutely, it can be. I was watching a review that said that line, and it made me laugh my ass off, because especially when you know episodes 25 and 26. or even the second half of End of Eva.
Yeah.
Subtlety is not its strong suit. Part of me is like, why did Mari get with Shinji?
Yeah, I was a little. That was another one. I definitely was in the camp.
It makes sense in the flashback because it's like, oh, he's grown to have finally have a relationship with something that he's always wanted.
Yeah.
Also, it confirms that Shinji is straight and not a homosexual, like there was a lot of theories about. Which I must say, Evangelion's got to be one of the largest series I've ever seen with a bajillion different theories behind it.
Oh yeah.
There's so many theories out there.
But that was as a kid growing up. Like before I actually dived into Evangelion, I would just ask my brother about it, and he would get so excited talking about like, all right, so why do the rebuilds? Why is all the water red and stuff like that? Like, because he knows like.
Well, there was a theory saying that this was post End of Eva.
Yeah.
And that it was the cycle continuing.
Yep.
Which has neither been confirmed nor denied with the end with Thrice Upon a Time. Yeah. That could make sense in Thrice Upon a Time, because they don't outright say this is its own thing.
Yeah.
And plus, you do see Neon Genesis Evangelion episodes blatantly playing in the background.
Yeah.
In the projector room.
Yeah.
When Shinji and Gendo are talking to each other. So that fan's theory, though I don't really subscribe to it, is still plausible. But this did put to rest a lot of fan theories.
The song was great too. It was
One Last Kiss by
Hitari.
She did all the songs for the Evangelion film.
She also did
Kingdom
the like
Hearts?
main Kingdom Hearts, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, they also did. I know she's non-binary now, but
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
They announced that a while back. And
I did not, so I apologize.
No,
but anyways, I love their song.
Yeah, beautiful song.
It is. It's such a beautiful song, and that trailer. I saw the trailer when it came out and was using the song, and I sat there and I was like, "Oh, get ready, we're going on a field trip."
I also like for me. It's as I've gotten older and appreciated like the whole making of a movie more. I tend to sit through credits.
Me too.
On my own time, and
Me too.
This one, hearing their song throughout the credits after seeing everything that happened and seeing this series that I loved come to an end like that, it was very, very cathartic and very like, yeah.
That was great.
We're good.
I was very happy. I was like, oh, I love the ending. I wasn't quite in tears, but I did have a smile, and I felt warm.
See, I would have been if I was watching it by myself. I had a friend over, and it's much harder for me. It's much harder for me to be emotional to a movie.
It is significantly easier for me to watch something by myself and get emotional. In fact, I do all the time.
Me too.
All the time I do. I cry at the drop of a hat when it comes to a movie.
But if I'm by myself and I'm watching like something that's very sentimental to me, or like something like this, if I was by myself, I'd be probably a mess by the end of it.
That's one of the things with Evangelion is it's such a personal show.
Yeah.
It is such a show that is different for every person that watches it. There's a collective opinion of it being it's good. But in terms of how you're attaching to these characters in the scenarios and who you're relating to is different with every single person. There is no one, and I love that. I love that about Evangelion.
It's very much a show this is going to sound like a big grandiose speech. It's very much a show that you need to experience on your own accord.
It is.
You need to choose. You need to choose to watch Evangelion. You can't just like. That's why the whole Netflix thing. I was happy it was there, but at the same time, Evangelion isn't just a show. It's like, oh, I'll try this show out. It's you need to take the time and commit to it.
It's true.
It's because it's a rough sit at times.
It is.
But when you get through it all, and you take the time to sit down and understand what you just watched, there's a takeaway from it, and that's. As a kid, I was initially like, oh, I get it. This is one of the anime greats. I understand. But it wasn't as I've gotten older where I realized, no, there's more that I didn't understand just yet.
Right up there with Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah.
It deserves every bit of credit that it gets. It's one of those cases where I'm like, no, this deserves every bit of validation that it gets. I think the movies you can get away with watching it with a buddy or a friend. I think the show in particular, and End of Eva especially, watch it by yourself.
Yeah, it's
And I think that adds to the experience, because it is an experience.
yeah.
It's not a show that you can sit down and turn your brain off. The show makes you think, it makes you question, and it makes you feel.
Yeah.
That's the big thing with this show, and this Thrice Upon a Time in particular. You feel shit. Like, you feel angry, you feel sad, you feel hopeful, and it'll crush you. And I was reading a comment, and it said, I needed this. It was on the song, actually, One Last Kiss. And it said, oh, I needed this after feeling empty at the ending of Thrice Upon a Time. And I got worried. I was like, uh-oh, is it going to be like that weird ending on the End of Eva?
Yeah.
But I left, and I was like, I was warm. I felt anything but empty.
Yeah, I did not feel that. Empty is not the word that would come to my mind.
Yeah.
Again, for me, the word that comes to my mind was catharsis and relief, and I mean that in the most positive ways.
Same. I felt full. This sounds weird too, but I felt full.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, I've
had
done
the fill.
Eva.
Yeah.
I've completed Eva.
I remember reading somewhere that Anno is okay with the idea of there being more Evangelion stuff without him. And while I respect his opinion on that, of course I do, at the same time, Evangelion to me is a piece of media where it's so ingrained with its creator that for me, it's a little hard to accept stuff that isn't by him of it.
Well, this isn't even really a case where it's like we're saying it's him, but really it was other people, that were really doing this. Like, for example, this film had 4 directors on it.
Yeah.
But you gotta say Hideaki Anno, because this is his shit.
Yep.
This is his work, his creation, his world. I'm happy for him.
Yeah, me too.
I'm really happy for him. I'm like, he's done.
Yeah.
And it feels like he's done. And it's not in a bad way. He said his goodbyes. He said goodbye to every character. He said goodbye to the cast, too. I don't know if you read about any of that, but him saying goodbye to the cast.
I didn't, actually.
And everything like that. Yeah, it's actually really touching.
It sounds nice.
And that comes, if you know all that stuff, it adds to the movie. It really does add to Thrice Upon a Time. Thrice Upon a Time was good already.
Yeah.
But add that to it. It adds a whole other level of emotion to it.
Yeah, and this is a small thing too, but like it even adds, and maybe I'm over exaggerating a little bit. It even adds to the movie poster, because the movie poster for Thrice Upon a Time, it's just all the characters waving to you.
Yeah,
just on the beach.
I think the trailer, it ends with them saying goodbye to all Evangelion.
Yeah.
Or Evangelions, and I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah, it's
like seeing your best friends grow up.
Yeah.
And this succeeded in droves, I think. It succeeded in droves.
I think so too.
I think it was a flawed movie, don't get me wrong, but I think it was a good ending.
I think it has its flaws too, but I think, for me at least, the highs outshine those flaws.
I'd agree with you. Yeah. And I was also extremely happy to see how successful this movie was.
No, me too.
At the box office. I mean, it didn't really surprise me, because Evangelion's always successful. Or has been successful in the past.
Yeah, but I think it was consistently successful too. Like,
well, this is his highest grossing not just the highest grossing Evangelion rebuild film, but it's the highest grossing film Hideaki Anno has ever made. It outdid Shin Godzilla, which floored me, because that was a huge hit.
It was a beautiful movie and a beautiful end to
I think this is how people feel when they finish Lord of the Rings.
I can't tell if you're being serious or not now.
Well, I'm half being serious.
Okay, yeah.
2 completely different stuff. But, whenever I hear people talk about finishing Lord of the Rings, they're like, wow, an experience. Yeah. And here we are talking about Evangelion in that way.
Yeah.
But
no, I can imagine that. I can imagine, too, for, like when the original Star Wars trilogy was coming out, like, to see the conclusion for that, too, I'd imagine it was a feeling similar like that.
Similar,
it's way different. Way different now. But, like, it's way different.
Like, there hasn't been a bad Evangelion thing, in my opinion. There hasn't been... The manga's good. The game, I guess, is okay. I haven't seen a Let's Play.
To be honest. I haven't played any of them.
Not my cup of tea. But it does do some lore stuff in it that I like.
Straight up like Smash Brothers, and I'm like, what the fuck?
Weird.
What?
I'm very, very happy with this. Very happy with it.
Me too.
Well, Lucas, I think it's about time we wrap this up. I think we've been talking about a movie just about as long as the movie. Uh,
Yeah, that's good though. That's good because it just shows how much we really enjoyed this movie. Like it
yeah,
was
yeah. This isn't like Godzilla versus Kong where
no,
I enjoyed it because of how stupid it was.
yeah,
No, this is very thought provoking, very emotional, very emotional. Everything. This movie was in very much way of everything a finale needs to be. Well, Lucas, I want to say thank you for joining me on this. I wanted you to be on this because you're far more of an anime dude than me, than moi.
thank you kindly.
Um, so I'm sort of in out of my territory here. I just love Evangelion. Don't ask me to be into much for anime, but I'm glad. You also, I have a lot of friends, FYI, that are really into anime, but none of them seem to have watched Evangelion.
Really. Because to me, Evangelion is like a rite of passage. It's like,
Yeah.
like it's you gotta do it at some point.
Yeah. Excuse me. Oh,
It's
that's a
like
sign that we got to wrap this up.
I've always stressed this about Evangelion. I've said it kind of already, but like it's an experience that you need to make the choice to watch. You need to make
You
that up.
can't be forced to watch it either.
You need to commit to it.
Yes.
Not only that, you need to commit to it and understand that there's going to be things that are going to be weird at times. There are things that are going to seem almost silly at times, but for the most part, there's reasons for it. Like it is exactly there's a reason why it's done like this.
Exactly. That's a wonderful way to put it. Right now, we're just kind of talking in circles. Do you have anything you want to pimp out, sir? Specifically, this interesting looking set that you have behind you.
Oh, well, this is not really anything specifically. This is just my figure setup at home. But
Okay.
no. But so I'll just pimp out. So I have gameplay buddies. We're gonna be getting back to that soon, pretty soon. Pow Pop is also in the works of a comeback to. I dropped a video recently that was very personal to me. So if you want to go check that out if you can. And that's really all I got for right now. But things are on the horizon, and I think the future is looking pretty bright.
Again, I'm not going to be uploading as frequently as I used to, but I will still be doing stuff such as this. So all of A&P's social media is in the description below. There's a crap ton of stuff available on my website as well. Again, all the links and stuff are in the social media below. But in the end, thank you for joining me, Lucas, and we'll see you later, everybody.